The meeting room smelled like ozone and fear. Ambassador David Reed sat at the curved table while alien delegates argued in 17 different languages about trade routes and mining rights. The Galactic Council had called this emergency session after reports came in about missing cargo ships near the rim worlds. David listened to the chittering of the insect-like Vorthak and the melodic tones of the Altarian crystals while his tablet beeped with incoming messages from Earth. Most species in the galaxy thought humans were boring. They had joined the Council 50 years ago with promises of peace and cooperation. Human colonies produced excellent food and medicine. Human engineers built reliable machines that rarely broke down. Human diplomats always voted for compromise and never started fights during council sessions. The other species had decided that humans were useful but not particularly dangerous, David's tablet showed. Another message from Fleet Command back on Earth. 3 human colonies had gone silent in the past 6 hours. The Ravager Collective was moving through human space like a plague of locusts. The collective was notorious for their efficiency in stripping planets bare and taking entire populations as slaves. They had been doing this for over 1,000 years to dozens of species across the galaxy, the Altarian delegate was speaking. Now about proper procedures for investigating missing ships. Her voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. She suggested forming a committee to study the problem over the next few months. The Helix representative agreed with a series of crystalline tones that roughly translated to patience. Being a virtue worth cultivating, David looked at the latest report on his tablet. 12 human worlds had now gone dark. The collective moved fast once they started hunting. Their ships were designed for quick strikes and rapid extraction of resources. They would strip a planet of everything valuable and disappear before anyone could mount a defense. The Council had never been able to stop them because the collective never stayed in one place long enough to be caught. Another message arrived from Admiral Morrison. The collective had broadcast their demands on all human frequencies. They wanted unconditional surrender of all human colonies in the Outer Rim. In return, they would allow the core worlds to continue existing as long as they paid tribute in the form of food, medicine, and manufactured goods. The alternative was complete destruction. David set down his tablet and cleared his throat. The alien delegates continued their discussion about forming subcommittees and scheduling follow-up meetings. The Vorthak representative clicked his mandibles in what David had learned was their equivalent of laughter. Apparently the idea of humans mounting any kind of resistance was amusing to a species that had conquered 40 star systems through sheer brutality. Excuse me, David said quietly. The room fell silent. Even after 50 years, the other species still found human voices unsettling. Something about the way humans controlled their vocal cords reminded other species of predators they preferred not to think about. I need to make an announcement. The Altarian delegate's crystalline form flickered with colors that indicated mild irritation. Ambassador Reed, we are in the middle of important discussions about proper diplomatic channels. David stood up slowly. His movement was deliberate and controlled in a way that made several delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. The Ravager Collective has attacked 13 human colonies. They have killed or enslaved approximately 13 million human beings. Men, women, children, and families who were living peaceful lives on worlds they had spent generations building. The Helix representative made a sound like distant thunder. These are tragic events, but they must be addressed through proper channels. The Council has procedures for handling such situations. The procedures have failed, David replied. His voice carried an edge that made the temperature in the room seem to drop several degrees. The collective has been raiding and enslaving species for a millennium. Your procedures have never stopped them. They have never faced consequences for their actions. The Vorthak delegate clicked his mandibles again. With respect, Ambassador Reed, humans cannot possibly hope to match the collective's military capabilities. They have conquered 60 species over the past 1,000 years. Your people are farmers and engineers, not warriors. David reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device. It looked like a simple communicator, but several of the more technologically advanced species recognized it as something else entirely. The Altarian delegate's colors shifted to patterns that indicated sudden concern. "This is a direct link to Earth Fleet Command," David said. "I am about to give the collective 48 hours to return all human prisoners and withdraw from human space. After that deadline passes, humanity will handle this situation ourselves." The room erupted in what various species used for laughter. The Vorthak found it particularly amusing. The Altarian delegate's crystals chimed with sounds that translated roughly to disbelief mixed with pity. Even the normally stoic Helix representative made noises that suggested they thought David had lost his mind. "You cannot be serious," the Altarian said. "The collective has warships that can reduce planets to asteroids. They have weapons that can boil away atmospheres. They have been perfecting the art of warfare for longer than human civilization has existed." David activated the communicator. "Fleet Command, this is Ambassador Reed, authorization code Omega 77, initiate Sleeping Giant Protocol. 48. Our countdown begins now." The response came immediately in a voice that carried the weight of military authority. "Acknowledged, Ambassador. Sleeping Giant Protocol is active. All assets are moving to ready status. Clock is ticking." David deactivated the communicator and looked around the room. The laughter had stopped. Something in his expression had changed in a way that made even the most confident delegates suddenly remember that humans were one of the few species that had achieved spaceflight by turning their own planet's hostile environment into a garden. Has anyone in this room ever asked why Earth's dominant species survived when 99% of all life forms that ever existed on our planet died? Out? David's voice was conversational but carried undertones that made several delegates involuntarily check for exits. Has anyone wondered why a species that claims to be peaceful managed to completely dominate a world where everything bigger than a mouse tried to eat everything smaller than a whale? The Altarian delegates' colors had shifted to patterns that indicated genuine fear. "Ambassador Reed, surely you cannot be suggesting that humanity would resort to violence. You have been model citizens of the galactic community." David smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "We have been model citizens because we chose to be. We integrated into galactic society because we wanted to. We follow council procedures because we believe in civilization." He paused and let his words sink in. "But civilization is a choice, not a limitation. And some choices can be unmade." The communicator beeped with an incoming message. David glanced at it, and his smile became even less pleasant. "The collective has responded to our ultimatum by accelerating their attacks. 5 more colonies have gone silent in the past hour. They seem to think that human threats are as empty as council procedures." David began walking toward the exit. "They are about to learn that you should never mistake kindness for weakness. And you should never, ever pick a fight with the most lethal species in the universe." The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded like a weapon being loaded. The coffee was still hot when Fleet Admiral Kate Morrison received the coded transmission that would change everything. She had been reviewing supply reports in her office aboard the orbital station above Earth when the message arrived with the highest priority encryption. The words "Sleeping Giant Protocol" appeared on her screen, followed by authentication codes that hadn't been used in 50 years. Morrison set down her coffee cup and walked to the window, overlooking Earth's blue marble surface. Hundreds of civilian ships moved through the traffic lanes between the planet and its orbital facilities. Cargo haulers carried food and manufactured goods to the outer colonies. Passenger liners transported families and tourists to vacation destinations among the stars. Everything looked peaceful and normal. That was about to change. Morrison activated her personal communicator and spoke a single word: "Awaken." Across human space, the transformation began. The cargo ship Wanderer had been hauling agricultural supplies to a farming colony when Captain Tom Bradley received the activation signal. He immediately changed course and headed for the nearest collective position. His crew began the process that would turn their innocent-looking transport into something the enemy had never seen before: The ship's hull plates shifted and rearranged themselves with mechanical precision. Hidden weapon ports opened along the sides of the vessel. The cargo holds that had been carrying wheat and corn were revealed to be launch bays for fighter craft that looked like they had been designed by creatures who understood that the universe was not a safe place. Similar transformations were occurring throughout human space. Mining stations that had been extracting ore from asteroids suddenly revealed massive manufacturing facilities hidden in their cores. The research stations on uninhabited worlds powered up fusion reactors that had been waiting in standby mode for decades. Defensive platforms that had been disguised as communication satellites began deploying weapon systems that could crack moons. Morrison walked to her command center, where dozens of officers were already at their stations. The room hummed with quiet efficiency as reports flowed in from across human space. Every human military asset was coming online simultaneously after 50 years of careful preparation. "Admiral," reported Commander Hayes, "all sleeper assets are responding. We have full activation on 3,000 combat vessels, 800 orbital platforms, and 47 manufacturing centers. Estimated time to full combat readiness is 6 hours. Morrison nodded while watching the tactical display that showed the true scope of human military preparation. The Galactic Council had insisted that such weapons were unnecessary in a civilized galaxy. They had demanded that humanity limit its military to a few dozen patrol ships and some orbital defense platforms. Humanity had agreed to these terms and had appeared to comply completely. The Council had never asked about the cargo ships that happened to be built with military-grade armor plating. They had never questioned why human mining operations required such sophisticated sensor arrays. They had never wondered why research stations needed fusion reactors powerful enough to run entire cities. "Status report from the colonies?" Morrison asked. "The collective has accelerated their attacks after receiving our ultimatum," Hayes replied. "They've hit 5 more worlds in the past hour. They're broadcasting messages claiming that human resistance is futile and that surrender is the only option." Morrison's expression hardened. "Show me the footage from the colony attacks." The main screen displayed images that had been transmitted from hidden surveillance drones before the colonies went dark. Morrison watched collective forces herding human civilians into cargo ships. She saw children being separated from their parents. She saw elderly people being left behind because they couldn't work in the slave camps. "Ma'am," said Lieutenant Blake, incoming transmission from the collective fleet. "They're demanding that we stand down immediately or face complete annihilation." Morrison stared at the screen showing human families being loaded onto slave ships like cattle. "Tell them we declined their generous offer." The collective had made their decision based on 50 years of observing human behavior. They had seen a species that preferred negotiation to conflict. They had watched humans consistently choose peaceful solutions even when violence might have been more efficient. They had concluded that humanity was weak and that threatening them would result in quick surrender. They had never asked why a species that claimed to be peaceful had managed to completely dominate a planet where natural selection had favored the most successful predators in the galaxy's history. "Admiral," he said quietly, "we're receiving reports that the collective is treating our people as they have treated every other species they've conquered. They're using our citizens as forced labor in their mobile foundries. The conditions are brutal." Morrison activated the fleet-wide communication system. "All units, this is Admiral Morrison. You have all seen the intelligence reports. You know what the collective is doing to our people? You know what they have done to dozens of other species over the past 1,000 years?" Her voice carried across human space to every ship, every station, every hidden facility that had been waiting for this moment. "We tried diplomacy. We tried working through proper channels. We gave them a chance to return our people peacefully. They chose to continue their aggression." Morrison paused and looked around the command center at officers who had trained their entire careers for a war they had hoped would never come. "Today we remind the galaxy why predators don't hunt in packs unless they're preparing to take down something bigger than themselves. Today we show them what happens when you pick a fight with the most lethal species in the universe. The tactical display updated as human forces began moving into position. Ships that had been disguised as civilian vessels revealed their true nature. Weapons platforms that had been hidden in asteroid fields powered up targeting systems that could track objects moving at significant fractions of light speed. All units report ready for combat operations, Hayes announced. We have over 4,000 ships in position to begin simultaneous strikes on collective forces throughout their operational area. Morrison watched the display showing the locations of every known collective ship and facility. Human intelligence had been tracking their movements for decades. Every supply depot, every mobile base, every slave camp had been cataloged and marked for elimination. The collective thinks they're hunting scattered refugees, Morrison said. They don't realize they're being herded into a trap that spans 17 star systems. She activated her command console and entered the authorization codes that would begin the largest military operation in human history. All units, you are authorized to engage. Rules of engagement are simple. Any collective vessel or facility that does not immediately surrender and release all prisoners is to be destroyed. No exceptions, no mercy. The response came back from thousands of ships simultaneously. Acknowledged, Admiral. Beginning operations now, Morrison watched as human forces began their attack. The collective had spent 1,000 years perfecting their military doctrine based on overwhelming force and shock tactics. They had never fought an enemy that had spent 50 years preparing for this exact moment, the first collective squadron to encounter. Human forces was patrolling near a mining system when 3 cargo ships approached on standard commercial vectors. The collective commander ordered them to stop for inspection, expecting to find more human refugees or perhaps some useful supplies. Instead, the cargo ships opened fire with weapons that shouldn't have existed. The lead collective vessel was destroyed before its crew could even send a distress signal. The remaining ships found themselves facing an enemy that had designed their weapons specifically to counter every known collective defense system. First, engagement is complete, Hayes reported. Enemy squadron destroyed with no survivors. Our forces are proceeding to the next target. Morrison nodded while watching similar reports flood in from across human space. Send a message to the collective command structure. Tell them they have 6 hours to surrender all prisoners and withdraw from human space. After that, we stop taking prisoners. She looked at the tactical display showing human forces moving through space with deadly efficiency. They wanted to see what humans do when our children are threatened. Now they're going to learn. The alarm system screamed through the corridors of the collective war vessel Devastator as Commander Grack tried to understand what was happening to his fleet. 3 of his escort ships had simply vanished from his sensors without sending any distress signals. The 4th had managed to transmit a fragmentary message about cargo ships before the communication cut off in a burst of static. Grack belonged to a species that had been conquering other civilizations for over 1,000 years. His people had perfected the art of warfare through countless campaigns against weaker species. They had learned that superior technology and overwhelming force were the keys to victory. They had never encountered an enemy that fought back with anything approaching competence. The tactical display showed a single human cargo vessel approaching on standard commercial vectors. Its transponder identified it as the Wanderer, a converted freight hauler that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts. The ship's hull was battered and scarred from years of service hauling supplies between human colonies. Target the human vessel, Grack ordered. We will make an example of them before continuing our operations. The Devastator's weapon systems locked onto the approaching ship while Grack composed a message to broadcast throughout human space. He would describe how easily human ships could be destroyed and how futile resistance would be. It would demoralize the remaining human forces and make the conquest proceed more smoothly. The Wanderer was now within optimal firing range. Grack raised his hand to give the order to fire when something impossible happened. The human cargo ship began to transform. The battered hull plates slid apart to reveal a vessel that looked like it had been designed by creatures who understood that the universe was full of things that wanted to kill you. Weapon ports opened along the ship's length while armor plating deployed to protect critical systems. The cargo holds revealed themselves to be launch bays for fighter craft that moved with predatory grace. Impossible, Grak whispered as the transformed vessel opened fire with weapons that tore through the Devastator's shields like they were made of paper. Humans are not warriors, they are farmers and engineers. The Wanderer's first salvo destroyed the Devastator's primary weapons while its fighters engaged the escort vessels with tactics that seemed to anticipate every defensive maneuver. The human ship moved through space with mechanical precision, its weapons finding every weak point in collective armor and shields. Captain Tom Bradley watched the enemy vessels die with professional satisfaction. He had spent 30 years disguised as a freight captain while his ship maintained the fiction of being a converted cargo hauler. The Wanderer looked like a civilian vessel because it had been designed to look that way. Every component had been carefully chosen to maintain the illusion while concealing the deadliest weapons humanity had ever created. Collective vessels neutralized, reported his weapons officer. No survivors detected. Bradley nodded while checking the tactical display for additional targets. Similar engagements were occurring throughout human space as the Collective discovered that their intelligence about human military capabilities was 50 years out of date. They had based their invasion plans on the assumption that humans were as weak as they appeared. They had never considered that a species capable of surviving Earth's hostile environment might be very good at hiding their true nature until it was too late for their enemies to do anything about it. General Amy Torres coordinated the overall campaign from a command center buried deep beneath the surface of Mars. The facility had been constructed during the early years of human expansion into space, back when humanity still remembered what it meant to be the most dangerous predator on their home planet. Torres watched the tactical displays, showing human forces engaging collective ships throughout 17 star systems. Each engagement followed the same pattern. The collective would detect what appeared to be human civilian vessels and move to intercept them. The human ships would then reveal their true nature and destroy the enemy forces before they could retreat or call for reinforcements. Status report, Torres requested. We have eliminated 37 collective squadrons in the past 6 hours, reported Colonel Hayes. Enemy losses total approximately 400 vessels with no survivors. Our losses are 0. Torres nodded while studying the larger tactical picture. The collective had committed most of their mobile forces to what they believed was a hunting expedition against scattered human refugees. They had no idea that every move they made was being tracked and analyzed by human intelligence services that had been studying their methods for decades. The enemy is beginning to realize that something is wrong, Hayes continued. They're pulling back from isolated positions and forming larger battle groups. They're trying to consolidate their forces. Let them, Torres replied. The more ships they gather in one place, the more efficient our operations become. The collective military doctrine was based on the experiences of 1,000 years of conquest. They had developed tactics that worked against species that fought, using conventional military strategies. They had never encountered an enemy that treated war as a form of applied science rather than a contest of strength. Human forces had been designed from the beginning to counter every known collective weapon and tactic. Every human ship carried detailed intelligence about enemy capabilities. Every human weapon had been optimized to exploit specific weaknesses in collective armor and shields. Every human tactical doctrine had been crafted to turn the enemy's strengths into liabilities. War Master Drak commanded the largest collective battle group in human space. His fleet consisted of 200 warships, including several planet killers that could reduce inhabited worlds to lifeless chunks of rock. He had been summoned from the core worlds specifically to deal with the unexpected human resistance. Drak studied the tactical reports with growing concern. 37 squadrons had been destroyed without managing to damage a single human vessel. The enemy was using weapons and tactics that hadn't appeared in any intelligence reports. More disturbing, they seemed to know exactly where every collective ship was located at all times. The humans are using some form of advanced stealth technology, Drack's intelligence officer reported. Their ships appear to be civilian vessels until they attack. Then they transform into military configurations that don't match any known human designs. Drack examined the sensor recordings from the destroyed squadrons. The human ships moved with mechanical precision and fired their weapons with deadly accuracy. Their tactics showed a level of sophistication that suggested extensive training and preparation. How long have they been preparing for this? He asked. Based on the coordination of their attacks and the sophistication of their technology, they must have been planning for this war for at least 50 years, the intelligence officer replied. They have been preparing to fight us since the day they joined the Galactic Council. Drack felt something he had never experienced in 1,000 years of conquest. For the first time in his military career, he was facing an enemy that might actually be more dangerous than his own forces. Send a message to the human command structure, he ordered. Tell them we are willing to negotiate a ceasefire. We will discuss terms for returning their prisoners. The response came back within minutes. It was brief and delivered in a voice that carried the weight of absolute authority. You had your chance to negotiate. You chose to continue attacking our people. Now you face the consequences of your decision. Drack looked at the tactical display showing human forces moving through space with deadly purpose. They weren't just fighting a war. They were executing a plan that had been decades in the making. The humans had been pretending to be sheep while secretly preparing to become wolves. Now the wolves were hunting, and they were very, very good at it. All units, Drack broadcast to his fleet, prepare for defensive operations. We are no longer hunting the humans. They are hunting us. The War Master of the Ravager Collective had finally understood the truth that would destroy his people. He had picked a fight with the most lethal species in the universe, and now it was too late to run. The nebula stretched across 3 light-years of space, a brilliant cloud of gas and dust that had been forming new stars for millions of years. War Master Drack had chosen this location for his final stand because the electromagnetic interference would limit sensor range and force the humans to fight at close quarters where collective superior numbers might make a difference. Drack commanded the last major collective battle group still operating in human space. 200 warships floated in formation among the glowing clouds of stellar nursery gas. These were the survivors of a fleet that had numbered over 1,000 vessels just 2 weeks ago. The humans had been systematically destroying collective forces throughout 17 star systems with methodical efficiency. They're coming, reported his sensor officer. Multiple contacts approaching from all vectors. Drack studied the tactical display as human forces emerged from hyperspace at precisely calculated positions around the nebula. They had surrounded his entire fleet without giving any indication of their approach. The humans moved with the coordination of a predator species that had learned to hunt in packs. How many ships? Drack asked. Difficult to determine through the interference, the sensor officer replied. At least 300 contacts, possibly more. They appear to be maintaining formation while closing on our position. Drack felt his stomach clench with a fear he had never experienced in 1,000 years of conquest. The humans had somehow assembled a fleet larger than his own while maintaining complete secrecy about their approach. They had turned his chosen battleground into a carefully constructed trap. All units, prepare for combat, Drack broadcast to his fleet. We will show these humans what happens when they challenge the might of the collective. The first human attacks came not from the approaching fleet but from within the nebula itself. Asteroids that had been floating peacefully in the gas clouds suddenly revealed themselves to be weapons platforms. The humans had hollowed out chunks of rock and converted them into fortress stations, bristling with weapons that could crack planet-sized moons. Drack watched in horror as hidden human positions opened fire from locations that should have been empty space. The enemy had spent months preparing this battlefield. seeding it with weapons and sensors while his forces pursued what they thought were fleeing human refugees. They've been leading us here, Drac realized. Every retreat, every tactical withdrawal, it was all designed to bring us to this place. The collective vessels found themselves caught in crossfire from directions they hadn't even known were possible. Human weapons platforms fired from concealed positions, while stealth ships that had been trailing the collective fleet for weeks revealed themselves and attacked from behind. Admiral Morrison watched the battle unfold from the bridge of the UES. Retribution? The massive dreadnought had been hidden in the nebula's center for 3 days, its crew surviving on emergency rations and recycled air while waiting for the enemy to arrive. Now the ship's weapons were free to demonstrate what human engineering could accomplish when the goal was complete annihilation. All platforms report ready, announced her tactical officer. We have the enemy fleet completely surrounded. Morrison nodded while studying the tactical display. The collective had gathered their remaining forces in a tight formation, probably hoping to concentrate their firepower for a breakthrough attempt. Instead, they had made themselves into a perfect target for weapons that had been designed specifically to counter their defensive systems. Begin firing sequence, Morrison ordered. I want every enemy vessel destroyed, no survivors. The battle that followed was less a fight than an execution. Human forces had been tracking every collective ship for weeks, analyzing their defensive capabilities and plotting firing solutions that would penetrate their armor. When the weapons opened fire, they did so with surgical precision that left no room for error or escape. The collective vessels tried to return fire but found themselves facing an enemy that seemed to anticipate every move they made. Human ships appeared and disappeared like ghosts in the nebula, striking from unexpected angles before vanishing back into the glowing gas clouds. Captain Bradley guided the Wanderer through the chaos of battle with practiced ease. His ship had been part of the trap from the beginning, one of dozens of vessels that had been herding the collective fleet toward this predetermined killing ground. Now his crew worked with mechanical efficiency to eliminate enemy targets with weapons that had been designed by a species that understood the mathematics of destruction. Target the command ship, Bradley ordered. Make sure their war master understands what happens when you threaten human children. The Wanderer's main guns locked onto the Devastator and fired a concentrated barrage that penetrated the enemy ship's shields and armor like they were made of paper. The collective flagship broke apart in a brilliant explosion that lit up the nebula for hundreds of kilometers. In every direction, Drac had just enough time to understand that he was about to die before the human weapons turned his ship into expanding plasma. His last thought was a recognition of the terrible mistake his people had made. They had attacked a species that fought wars the way other species played games, with absolute dedication to achieving victory regardless of the cost. The battle lasted exactly 17 minutes. When it ended, not a single collective vessel remained intact. The humans had achieved complete annihilation of enemy forces while suffering 0 casualties. The nebula glowed with the light of burning wreckage and the satisfaction of a job well done. Morrison stood on the bridge of the Retribution as her fleet began recovery operations. Teams of specialists moved through the debris field, scanning for survivors and cataloging enemy technology. The few collective crew members who had made it to escape pods were recovered and processed according to galactic law. Admiral reported. Her communications officer, we're receiving surrender offers from collective commanders throughout the galaxy. They want to negotiate terms for ending the conflict. Morrison's expression remained cold as Arctic ice. Tell them the time for negotiation ended when they chose to continue attacking our people after we gave them a chance to withdraw peacefully. The tactical display updated to show the locations of remaining collective forces throughout the galaxy. Their mobile cities, massive ships that served as homes for billions of their people, were scattered across dozens of star systems. Each one was defended by weapons that could shatter planets and protected by shields that could deflect the energy output of entire stars. Ma'am, her tactical officer said quietly, the remaining collective forces are requesting mercy. They're offering to release all prisoners and withdraw from this region of space permanently. Morrison studied the display showing the enemy strongholds. Each one represented a target that would require careful planning and overwhelming force to eliminate. The collective had finally realized the true nature of their opponents, but their understanding had come too late to save them. The collective made their choice when they decided to enslave our people, Morrison said. They had centuries to develop peaceful relationships with other species. They chose conquest and brutality instead. Now they face the consequences of that choice. She activated the fleet communication system and addressed the thousands of human ships, preparing for the final phase of their campaign. All units, this is Admiral Morrison. We have successfully eliminated the collective's main battle fleet. Phase 2 of our operations will begin immediately. Morrison paused and looked around the bridge at officers who had trained their entire careers for this moment. The enemy has strongholds throughout the galaxy. They believe their mobile cities are too well defended for us to attack. They are about to learn that there is no defense against an enemy that has spent 50 years preparing for this exact situation. The human fleet began moving toward the collective's core systems with the methodical precision of a species that had learned to hunt the most dangerous predators in the galaxy. They had pretended to be peaceful farmers and engineers while secretly preparing to become the most efficient killers the universe had ever seen. The collective had awakened something that had been sleeping for 50 years. Now that it was awake, it would not stop until every trace of their civilization had been erased from existence. Signal all units, Morrison ordered. Begin final operations. Show them what happens when you pick a fight with the most lethal species in the universe. The hunt was entering its final phase, and the predators were hungry. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in absolute silence. Representatives from 47 species sat in their designated areas while Ambassador David Reed prepared to deliver his final report on the collective war, the chamber. That had once echoed with the sounds of debate and diplomacy now felt like a tomb where species came to bury their illusions about the nature of the universe. Reed activated the holographic display that showed the statistical summary of humanity's 6-week campaign against the Ravager Collective. The numbers were precise and comprehensive, delivered in the same calm voice that had once discussed trade agreements and cultural exchange programs. The Ravager Collective has been completely eliminated, Reed announced. All 17 of their mobile cities have been destroyed. Their entire fleet of over 2,000 vessels has been eliminated with no survivors. Every collective base, supply depot, and manufacturing facility has been systematically destroyed. The Altarian delegate's crystalline form flickered with patterns that indicated profound shock. You speak of complete genocide, Ambassador Reed. The collective was home to over 10 billion beings. Reed's expression remained neutral as he continued his report. The collective was given multiple opportunities to surrender and release our people peacefully. They chose to continue their aggression and accelerate their attacks on human civilians. The consequences of their decision were made clear from the beginning. The Helix representative produced sounds that roughly translated to horrified disbelief. But surely some survivors must have escaped. A civilization that ancient cannot simply vanish without a trace. The collective specialized in the complete destruction of other species, Reed replied. They perfected techniques for eliminating entire civilizations so thoroughly that no trace remained. We simply applied their own methods to them with greater efficiency. The display showed footage from the liberation of human colonies. Rescue teams moved through abandoned collective slave camps, documenting the conditions where human prisoners had been forced to work until they died. The images showed families that had been torn apart, children who had watched their parents die from exhaustion, and elderly people who had been left to starve because they were too weak to be useful. Our people who survived the camps are receiving medical treatment and counseling, Reed continued. The psychological trauma inflicted by the collective will take years to heal. Many survivors may never fully recover from what was done to them. The Vorthek delegate clicked his mandibles in what might have been nervous anxiety. What of the other species the collective held as slaves? Surely they were liberated during your operations, Reed nodded slightly. 43 species were freed from collective slave camps during our operations. They have been provided with medical care and transportation back to their homeworlds. Many of them had been held captive for decades. Some had been born in captivity and had never seen their ancestral worlds. The chamber fell silent as the implications of Reed's words sank in. The collective had been terrorizing the galaxy for over 1,000 years, enslaving entire species and destroying civilizations with impunity. The Galactic Council had been unable to stop them despite centuries of diplomatic efforts and military intervention attempts. Humanity had eliminated them completely in 6 weeks. The methods used to achieve this victory, the Altarian delegate said carefully, they seem to exceed anything we believed human military capabilities could accomplish. How is such a thing possible? Reed's smile was colder than the space between stars. The collective made the same mistake that many species make when evaluating human capabilities. They confused our preference for peace with an inability to wage war effectively. The display changed to show technical specifications for weapon systems that had been classified for 50 years. The assembled delegates studied designs that represented technology far in advance of anything they had believed humans possessed. These weapons were developed during the early years of human expansion into space, Reed explained. They were created by a species that had learned to survive on a planet where natural selection favored the most efficient predators. We built them because we understood that the universe was not a safe place for the weak. The Helix representative produced tones that indicated growing fear. But you joined the council with promises of peace. You agreed to limitations on military development. You signed treaties limiting your weapons and fleet sizes. Reed's expression remained calm, but his eyes held depths that made several delegates uncomfortable. We honored every treaty we signed. We limited our military to the exact specifications outlined in the agreements. We never violated a single provision of galactic law. The Vorthic delegates' mandibles clicked rapidly. Then how did you acquire such devastating military capabilities? The treaties limited the number of military vessels we could operate, Reed replied. They said nothing about cargo ships that happened to be built with military-grade armor and weapon systems. They restricted our military bases but not our mining operations or research facilities. They controlled our official fleet but not our civilian merchant marine. Reed activated another display showing the true scope of human military preparation. Every human colony had defensive systems disguised as industrial equipment. Every cargo ship was a potential warship. Every mining station could be converted to a weapons platform. Every research facility contained manufacturing capabilities for military hardware. The assembled delegates stared at the evidence of humanity's deception with growing horror. For 50 years they had believed they were dealing with a peaceful species that posed no threat to galactic stability. In reality, they had been sharing the galaxy with predators who had been preparing for war, while pretending to be harmless farmers and engineers. You have been lying to us for half a century, the Altarian delegate said, her crystalline form shifting to patterns that indicated betrayal and anger. We have been exactly what we appeared to be, Reed corrected. We are peaceful by choice, not by nature. We prefer diplomacy because it produces better outcomes than violence. We follow galactic law because we believe in civilization. He paused and let his words sink in. But we are also apex predators from a world where everything bigger than a mouse tried to eat everything smaller than a whale. That part of our nature doesn't disappear just because we choose not to use it. The display showed images from Earth's natural history. Predators that had ruled the seas for millions of years. Land animals that had survived ice ages and asteroid impacts. A species that had climbed to the top of the food chain on a planet where natural disasters regularly eliminated entire ecosystems. The collective made the fundamental error of mistaking kindness for weakness, Reed continued. They assumed that because we chose peace, we were incapable of war. They learned too late that there is a significant difference between choosing not to fight and being unable to fight. Captain Bradley entered the chamber carrying a sealed container that he placed on the table in front of Reed. The ambassador opened it to reveal a collection of items that had been recovered from collective slave camps. Wedding rings taken from prisoners. Children's toys that had been confiscated as punishment. Family photographs that would never be returned to their owners because the families no longer existed. These items belonged to human families that were torn apart by the collective, Reed said quietly. Children who watched their parents die from exhaustion. Parents who saw their children starve because there wasn't enough food in the camps. Elderly people who were abandoned to die because they couldn't work fast enough. The chamber was completely silent as Reed held up a child's drawing that showed a family standing together under a yellow sun. The picture had been folded and hidden by a young girl who had died in the camps before she could ever see her family again. The collective had 1,000 years to learn how to coexist peacefully with other species, Reed said. They chose conquest and slavery instead. They built their entire civilization on the suffering of others. When we gave them a chance to return, our people, and withdraw peacefully, they responded by accelerating their attacks and taking more prisoners. Reed carefully returned the items to their container. They made their choice. They discovered the consequences of threatening the children of the most lethal species in the universe. The Altarian delegates' forum flickered with patterns that might have been resignation or fear. What happens now? You have demonstrated that human military power far exceeds anything we previously believed possible. What are your intentions regarding the rest of the galaxy? Reed stood up and straightened his jacket in a gesture that somehow made him seem more dangerous despite its casual nature. Our intentions are exactly what they have always been. We want peace, cooperation, and mutual benefit for all species. We have no desire for conquest or domination. He walked toward the exit but paused at the door to deliver his final words to the assembled delegates. However, we also want the galaxy to understand that peace is a choice, not a limitation. Civilization is something we choose to maintain, not something that constrains us. And if any species makes the mistake of threatening our children, enslaving our people, or mistaking our kindness for weakness, they will discover that they have picked a fight with predators who spent 50 years pretending to be prey. The door closed behind Reed with a soft sound that seemed to echo through the chamber. Like a warning, the assembled delegates sat in stunned silence as they processed the implications of what they had learned. Humanity was not the peaceful species they had appeared to be. They were apex predators who had spent half a century preparing for a war they hoped would never come. They had honored every treaty and followed every law while secretly building the most devastating military force the galaxy had ever seen. The collective had learned too late that you should never pick a fight with the most lethal species in the universe. The rest of the galaxy would make sure they never forgot that lesson. In the years that followed, the Galactic Council would speak of the collective war in hushed tones. No species would ever again make the mistake of threatening humanity's children. The humans returned to their quiet diplomacy, their medical advances, and their peaceful ways. But everyone knew that beneath the surface, the predators were still there, watching and waiting with the infinite patience of a species that had learned to survive by being the most dangerous thing in the room, while looking like the most harmless. The galaxy was safer now. It was also more frightening, for those who understood the true nature of the species that called themselves human.